Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Ahlan wa sahlan wa marhaban bikum. Welcome, my name is Sulaimaan Ravat. In the previous episode, we were speaking on the life of Imam Asim, and I explained at length about why we're speaking in specific on the life of Imam Asim. The majority of the Muslims in the world today recite the Quran in the dialect of Hafs and Asim. The dialect of Imam Asim as transmitted by his student Hafs. There are various reasons as to why the majority of Muslims today recite in that dialect. It's the easier dialect from the various dialects in which the Quran was revealed to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam to recite in. But we want to focus on the qualities that made these individuals great, because knowledge of the Quran is easier to obtain. The true legacy of the Quran, in terms of the quality of the hearts of these individuals and their values and their actions, that is a different matter, and that is one that we don't focus on enough. So we spoke about the great talent that he had, natural talent in terms of voice, in terms of oratory skill, how he had great tact and wisdom. He would listen to the businessmen first so that they could go and indulge in their business. It wouldn't interfere with their work. They would benefit, the community would benefit. We spoke about how he would recite the Quran once in a day, outside of Ramadan, and twice in a day inside the month of Ramadan, and how even today we have people in our communities who can do that. How his 2 years of prolonged illness, he did not use it as an excuse to slack. Rather, he used it as an excuse to reach even greater heights. And as a result, he was able to recite the entire Quran from memory without any mistake. Recite the entire Quran from memory without any mistake. Now, we take the discussion further, right, in terms of Imam Asim. One day a man challenged him and said, how is it that you can be so devoted to the Quran? I mean, this is not sustainable, this is not practical. Imam Asim told him, listen, the Quran is the word of Allah. The Quran is the word of Allah. How can I not be consumed by it? The Quran is the word of Allah. How can I not be consumed by it? And then he said, when you truly listen to the Quran, you will feel it pulling at your soul. When you truly listen to the Quran, you will feel it pulling at your soul. Subhanallah. Subhanallah. Let's just take a moment, right? All of us, to just reflect and to ponder that when I listen to the recitation of the Quran every day in my salah, or if I'm listening to a rendition on the radio or via some device, the Quran says, إِذَا ذُكِرَ اللَّهُ وَجِلَتْ قُلُوبُهُمْ. Does my heart tremble? Does it have an effect on my heart? Does it soften my heart? Does it take me into like a kind of a different world? Does it give me a different feeling? If not, there's nothing wrong with the Quran. There's just some barrier. There's some impediment between me and the Quran. Maybe it's the contamination of the heart. Maybe it's distraction. Whatever it may be. I need to fix that, because the Quran is the word of Allah. How can you not be consumed by it? That's what he's saying. Why are you surprised, O questioner, that you're asking me, how can I be so devoted to the Quran? The word of Allah, how can you not be consumed by it? When you listen to it, it's like you're feeling it's pulling at your soul. It's pulling at your soul. Wow. What is our relationship with the Quran like? When we're reading, are we just reading casually and our minds and eyes and everything is distracted? When we're standing in Salatul Taraweeh, even if you don't understand Arabic, but it's the word of Allah, to what extent am I focused? Forget Taraweeh Salah, which is once a year in Ramadan. Every day, in my Farad Salah, in my Fajr, in my Maghrib, in my Isha, the Imam is reciting audibly, he's reciting loudly. To what extent is the Quran pulling at my soul? To what extent am I consumed by the Quran? Again, I want to emphasize this point, that it's not only, in the Khayrul Qurun, in the best of times, that people could be so devoted to the Quran. Even in our times, people who are teaching the Quran, you have some teachers, subhanAllah, day in, day night, they're just sitting and listening to others recite the Quran. Listening to others recite the Quran. Totally dedicated to the Quran. Whether they're teaching it at maktab level, or they're teaching it at the hifz class, or they're busy writing commentaries of the Quran. May Allah make us from among such fortunate people. Imam Asim, when he would go to the masjid for Jummah Salah, normally our scholars always telling us, go a little early, don't rush out immediately. It's Jummah. He would stay in the masjid from Jummah right until Asr. From Jummah right until Asr. Subhanallah. And another thing with Imam Asim is that whenever he would pass by any masjid, he would stop, go into that masjid, perform at least 2 rakats, 2 units of salah, then continue with his journey. Wow. That's the level of attachment with the Quran, the level of attachment with the house of Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala. And when you have that level of attachment with the Quran and that level of attachment with the house of Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala, then Allah blesses you in the way that He has been blessed. And that's when you leave a true legacy where majority of the Muslims in the world today recite according to the dialect that you have narrated. Now, we move on from Imam Asim to his student Hafs, right? We recite, like I've been explaining, the narration of Hafs and Asim. So Hafs, interestingly, was the stepson of Imam Asim. He was the stepson of Imam Asim. But Imam Asim looked after him so well and tutored him and mentored him that he became the one who looked after the knowledge and the legacy of his ustad better than any other student. Today, what's society's attitude towards a stepson? That's my wife's child from another man. It's not my blood. I have to look after him. Okay, fine. I mean, I got married to his mother, so he's got to be under my care. You know, that's how it is. So be it. That kind of stuff. But Imam Asim not only looked after him like his own son, he went beyond that. He went beyond that. And he was an outstanding teacher. And that resulted in an outstanding student. That's why they say that Hafs is the most accurate transmitter of Imam Asim's qira'ah. Hafs then settled in Baghdad and later on in Makkah al-Mukarramah until his demise. And he was dedicated, totally dedicated to preserving the legacy and the knowledge of his stepfather and his teacher, Imam Asim rather. And then his own, right? Hafs, his own attachment to the Quran. They say once he stayed awake the entire night reciting the Quran. He stayed awake the entire night reciting the Quran with such fervor that his neighbor made a remark. I could hear his sobbing through the walls as though he was being personally addressed by the verses of the Quran. Wow. How many of us recite the Quran or listen to the recitation of the Quran in such a way that it comes across like we are being personally addressed? You know, one is you sitting one-on-one with an important person, he's talking to you directly. And the other is you listening to a recording of somebody's conversation with someone else. There's a difference between the two. Now, this is Kalamullah. The Quran is Allah's love letter to humanity. Okay? And when you listen to the recitation of the Quran or when you're reciting the Quran, you should do it with such fervor and with such enthusiasm that it should be appreciated by Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala. And when Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala appreciates it, then you'll see that kind of resonance. You'll see that kind of magic. You'll see that kind of influence in whatever you are doing. So his attachment with the Quran was such that he would sob, right, when reciting the Quran in his tahajjud salah, or just reciting the Quran throughout the night. And the nature of his sobbing, I mean, people sob for different reasons, right? Somebody suffered a loss, he'll sob. And people will hear him and they'll say, I heard him wailing, I heard him crying, I heard him, howling. But his sobbing was such that he was like being personally addressed by the verses of the Quran Kareem. Wow, wow. So those are just a few snippets, a few tidbits, right, from the lives of Imam Asim and Imam Hafs. Inna hadha al-ilma sharifun fahuwa lish-sharifi. In the beginning of the last episode, I started off with this and I said that this is what we're focusing on, that this knowledge of the Quran is noble. And Allah truly gives it to those people of noble character. Those who don't have noble character may still get it. They may have knowledge of the science. They may memorize the Quran, but they don't truly benefit from the Quran and they don't truly become a means of other people benefiting. Now that we've discussed the life of Imam Hafs, and his Ustad and his teacher, Imam Asim, we will talk about another great personality, and that is Imam Jazari. His name is Shamsuddin Abul Khair Muhammad bin Ali bin Yusuf al-Jazari. He lived from the year 1350 to 429. He was a renowned scholar. His greatest knowledge was in the science of Tajweed and Qira'at, Quranic sciences, but he was quite knowledgeable in other sciences as well. He was born in Damascus in Syria, and he dedicated his life to mastering the Quran. At the tender age of 13, he had memorized the Quran. And he traveled extensively to learn from the leading scholars of his time in cities such as Cairo, Makkah Mukarramah, Medina Munawwara, Persia, and he got what they call ijazat, certifications in the various dialects of recitation of the Quran Kareem. And in a short span of time, he became an unparalleled expert in this discipline. He became an unparalleled expert in this discipline. And his famous work, he's got a number of works that are famous, but what is known as Jazariya, or Al-Muqaddama Al-Jazariya, which is a poem that outlines the rules of Tajweed. It's widely memorized, and it is widely studied these days. He was not only a Qari, one who was proficient in Quranic sciences, but he was also a skilled theologian, scholar. He was a jurist, he was a linguist, and eventually, being born in Damascus, he passed away in Shiraz in Persia. He left behind a legacy that was tremendous, which we will discuss after the break, inshallah. Welcome back. So just before the break, we were speaking about Imam Hafs, the student of Imam Asim, who was also his stepson, and how well his stepfather looked after him, and he became the greatest student of his stepfather. And his own attachment to the Quran, that his sobbing when reciting the Quran at night would have an impact on his neighbors. They would say it is as if the verses were being directly revealed to him, and they were addressing him. Then we also spoke about Imam Jazari, his birth and his earlier years, and how he became unparalleled in the science of Tajweed and Qira'at. Now, he had dedicated his life, Imam Jazari, he had dedicated his life. They say he went to over 80 scholars. He traveled extensively in an age when traveling was not easy, across various regions, Damascus, Egypt, Makkah, Medina, just to become proficient in these sciences. Now, here's a point of reflection. Imam Jazari, he once wrote that this study of the Quran is not merely meant to be academic. The study of the Quran is not merely meant to be academic, but it is a spiritual necessity. It's not merely meant to be academic, but it's a spiritual necessity. And then he described moments when he felt overwhelmed by divine awe whilst reflecting on the words of Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala. Wow. In material things, we're in for the highest. If I've got a car, then I want a Mercedes. Right? I got a car, average car, no, I want a Mercedes. If I got a Mercedes, I want a Porsche. If I got a Porsche, I want a Range Rover. If I got a Range Rover, no, somebody's got a Ferrari, they've got a Lamborghini. We always want to be higher. When it comes to spiritual matters, we should also endeavor to reach the highest heights. We must also work towards having our hearts touched and our hearts tremble when we listen to the Quran, or when we read the Quran. We should also want to achieve this height where we are overwhelmed by divine awe when reflecting on the words of Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala. He said something amazing, Imam Jazari. He said, the Quran is not taught merely with the tongue. The Quran is not taught merely with the tongue, but with the soul. Wow. You get many teachers and you get many subjects. There are those teachers who can teach the subject well in terms of transferring content from the textbook to the notebook, from their memory to the memories of their students. But when it comes to Quran, the divine word of Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala, you don't merely teach it with your tongue, you've got to teach it with your soul. Now there was a great scholar here in our parts who made many huffaz, and many of his students went on to become great huffaz, great qurra, great scholars. And when he passed away, and people were paying tribute to him, and one of his students was interviewed, he said, our teacher did not only teach us Quran, Our teacher did not only teach us Quran, but he created within us a passion for the Quran. Our teacher did not only teach us Quran, but he created within us a passion for the Quran. Wow. Whether you're teaching at a maktab level, or you're teaching in a Muslim school, or you're teaching in a hifz class, or you're teaching in a Darul Uloom class, or you're teaching tafsir in the masjid, or you're doing an ayah day tafsir from the front of the masjid, or you're doing something online, or you're doing something digitally, or you're doing something on social media, teach not only with your tongue, teach with your soul, especially when it comes to the divine sciences. Then and then only will you receive the light of the Quran as a teacher, and you would be able to purify the hearts of your students, because now you're not only transferring knowledge from your tongue to their ears, you're transferring the light of that knowledge from your heart to their heart. Let me say that again. When you're teaching divine sciences, when you're teaching Quran, it's not only about transmitting knowledge from your tongue to the ears of your student. It's about transferring the light and the noor of that knowledge from your heart to your student's heart, from one generation to the next generation. That's what you call leaving behind a legacy. Imam Jazari, you see, these were people who walked the talk. They were the Quran exemplified. He faced a very difficult time of financial crisis. He spent days without proper food. So here was this giant of an intellectual, this great imam, this great leader, this great scholar, this great teacher. But he didn't stretch his hands to anyone. He didn't ask anyone for help. He would spend the nights reciting those ayat and those verses of the Quran pertaining to sustenance, pertaining to reliance on Allah, tawakkul. And eventually Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala would send him help in unexpected ways. The Quran promises this. وَمَن يَتَوَكَّلْ عَلَى اللَّهِ فَهُوَ حَسْبُهُ. That if you rely on Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala, Allah will become sufficient for you. Allah will send you the help. Yeah, you make an effort, no doubt. But he wanted to keep himself pure. Right? It was permissible for him to seek assistance from others, but he wanted to keep himself pure. And as a result of wanting to keep himself pure, he did not stretch his hands to others. He did not go to others and tell them, I have a need. And his need was not for some luxury, for the bare necessities. Right? His need was, he didn't have proper food, but he recited these ayat. And by reciting these ayat, he was calling out unto Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala for help. And Allah responds. Allah says, وَإِذَا سَأَلَكَ عِبَادِي عَنِّي فَإِنِّي قَرِيبٌ. That when you ask of me, O my servant, I'm close. أُجِيبُ دَعْوَةَ الدَّاعِ إِذَا دَعَانِ. I respond to the supplication of the one who calls out unto me. وَنَحْنُ أَقْرَبُ إِلَيْهِ مِنْ حَبْلِ الْوَرِيدِ. Allah says we are closer to him than his jugular vein. So what we learn from here is that Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala at times puts you through tests, but how you respond to those tests would determine the heights that you would reach. وَمَن يَتَّقِ اللَّهَ يَجْعَلْ لَهُ مَخْرَجًا. If you remain conscious of Allah, conscious of the commands of Allah, conscious of the obligations of Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala, conscious of the rights of Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala upon you, then Allah creates for you an exit from every problem of yours. Allah creates for you an out from every difficult situation that you would find yourself in. Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala will create a way for you to find the solution. Allah will create a solution for you. So that was Imam Jazari. The next Imam that we want to discuss is Imam Shatibi. His name, Al-Qasim. That was his name, Qasim. He was born in Shatiba, Andalusia, Spain, right? Some say he was born blind. Others say that no, he wasn't born blind, he became blind later in life. And they deduce that from some of his poems. And these scholars would, their great works were put down in poem form so that students could memorize it. And then you would have the text in memory so that the rules would be then much easier to apply. So they say Imam Shatibi became blind later in his life. He became blind later in his life. He was not always blind. Already during his youth, he began his quest for knowledge. He went not only in terms of tajweed and qira'at, but also in terms of hadith. He went searching for muhaddithun, for qurra. And he studied amongst the most prominent qurra of his time. He had this insatiable thirst and desire for knowledge, especially in the field of Quranic sciences. He had a general thirst for knowledge, but it was insatiable, especially when it came to the field of Quranic studies, when it came to the field of Quranic studies. I don't want to go through the long list of scholars, under whom he studied in the various fields. But he had tremendous capacity and tremendous talent coupled with hard work. In life, you will notice, it's not people who have talent only that prosper. It's people who have talent and they couple it with a lot of effort. Or they have a little less talent than everyone else, but they make up for it with greater application, with greater effort, with greater dedication, with greater sacrifice. I've seen it over and over again in my life. Many times, not the kid who comes out first in class, and there's nothing wrong with coming out first in class. And you should endeavor to become first in class, but at the same time, you should continue to work hard. And the harder you work, the more Allah will give you the ability to prosper, and more Allah will give you the ability, to reach greater heights. And the more Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala will bless you in your efforts, because you show humility. You don't become complacent. Today, talented kids, talented youngsters, talented individuals are lazy. They rely too much on their talent and too little on hard work and on effort. And as a result, they don't get as much opportunity as others. Or when they get the opportunity, they don't make the most of it like others would make the most of it. So Imam Shatibi was a great scholar. He was proficient in the science of tajweed and qira'at, but he was also, like Imam Asim, a great orator. And he was given the responsibility of delivering the khutbahs, the sermons. And generally in his time and in his area, only people of really high caliber and people of great expertise and knowledge would be granted the podium to speak. And he was one of those who was granted the podium to speak. There was a catch though. When you took to the podium, you had to exaggerate in your praise of the leaders. It was a political thing. So you had to do it. There was no way out of it. And he became very reluctant to deliver these sermons and lectures because he was so uncomfortable with having to praise leaders in a way that was exaggerated. In Arabic they say mubalagha. And there came a time he didn't want to get into trouble. He did not want to entangle himself with the authorities of the day. So he just said, look, I need to depart on Hajj. And in those days, when you went on Hajj, it was a long journey, going and coming. So you would be gone for a long period of time. And he departed. He left Spain just because he didn't want to find himself in a position where he had to exaggerate in his praise of one of the leaders. That is how pure he was in his intentions. And that is how he kept himself uncompromised. And that's a great lesson for us to learn, on which we conclude this episode for today, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.